in a system where you could get a control mechanism by a non-human intelligence, who wins? Does the non-human intelligence trump the creator's own control of the system, or would the creator and his or her or its model of the universe at all times win in a in the control of its creation? Can its creation, in other words, be hacked momentarily by a non-human intelligence to produce Jacques Vallée's control system theory?
My response is that once again, this comes back to the purpose of the universe in the first place. So many questions are answered by acknowledging the purpose of the universe. It isn't possible to change this purpose of the universe. It is too deeply embedded in all the minute processes. I gave the example of self-repair of cells in a body. And you can't deny all of that in one fell swoop.
Welcome back to Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here speaking. Before I get into introducing our two guests today, this is going to be, we hope, the second of many three-way conversations that we'd like to have on the podcast. We've recorded enough episodes now where we have been seeing many ideas shared by several of our guests, and we thought this one here, this particular episode would be really, really cool to have, as we've already recorded with both. And I'll go right into the introduction. So Rudy Schild is a professor emeritus, astrophysicist, astronomer from Harvard and Smithsonian. He has had an illustrious career, and one of his deep expertise, is the study of black holes, and also the mysteries and the science of consciousness and the study of consciousness. He was also part of the Free Foundation, co-founded with three others, two of which have been on the podcast, and the other, who's no longer with us, Edgar Mitchell, who is also, and he was also an astronaut, amongst many things, and also the subject of many a writing by our other co-guest today, Nick Cook. And Nick Cook is an author of many books, and also a journalist, a trained journalist, and was the chief editor of Jane's Weekly, the preeminent journal for military aeronautics and aeronautic technology, and traveled around the world because of that. And over the last 20 years or so, 15 years, 17 years, whatever the number is, a long time, Nick has researched a lot of the work that folks like Rudy has worked on, including the work, of course, of Edgar Mitchell. And we had a wonderful little conversation, kind of a part one, a precursor conversation with Nick. And I feel as if this conversation that we're about to get started with can act like a part two with Nick, because we have not touched upon many of the themes that I expect we're going to with Nick here on the line, and Rudy. The nature of consciousness. Let's dive into the shallow end, shall we? Nick, well, we'll start with you. You've written extensively about this, and one of your first official forays was with a piece that you wrote for the Bigelow Institute a few years back. And in writing that piece, you come across a lot of scientific exploration by folks like Rudy Schild. We didn't talk about that in the first part. Let's get right into it. What is it? What is it that brought you to discover scientists like Rudy Schild?
So, thank you for that kind and warm introduction. And I'm so thrilled to be talking to Rudy today, because his work has shaped a lot of my more recent work. So it's going to be fascinating having this conversation with you and him. As you said, Luciano, I was trained as a technology journalist. Small correction, I was the aerospace editor of Jane's Defense Weekly, not its editor-in-chief.
I'm sorry.
Just before he had to go at me. And so I came at the phenomenon, if you like, and I'm talking here about the consciousness phenomenon, but within that, UFOs and UAP as a subset of that, very much initially as a nuts and bolts thing. I was a dyed-in-the-wool materialist looking at phenomena I couldn't explain through, to begin with, materialist eyes. But then I realized that just that wasn't cutting it from in any way in the form of an explanation for what was being presented. So I started to study consciousness very late in the game. I did that because I was kind of chucked in the deep end myself when my wife had a shared death experience at the death of her mother. So, and which I was in attendance. And it was so astounding to me that it pulled me into the whole consciousness subject. And as you say, I researched it heavily, and I ended up submitting an essay in Robert Bigelow's essay contest for BICS, his Institute of Consciousness Studies. And I, certainly against my expectation, and I think many others, I ended up getting a prize, a special mention prize in that competition. But that really pulled me into the whole consciousness subject. And I have found it very helpful for me to, particularly when approaching, say, the UAP or UFO phenomenon, to approach it from both ends. I can look at it from the aerospace related side because that was my early training. I can look at it through the lens of a defense issue. And latterly, I've been able to look at it through the lens of a consciousness-based approach. So that sort of very much brings me into the consciousness domain.
Rudy, I know that you before the recording you had mentioned that you perused some of Nick's work. Let's go back a little bit further, like 3 days ago, where the two of you had met telephonically. Nick, I don't want to steal your fire, and this is not the purpose. But Nick asked you a question that he was very interested in finding an answer to. It's been one of his, I guess, one of the things that he wants to know very sorely about. As do I, actually. He brought up a new curiosity for me after that call, actually. And then you explained it, and I'm gonna leave this for Nick, but you explained it, couched with the need to want to explain your take on the nature of the universe. So why don't we start that? Let's lay the base there. To you, Rudy, what is the nature of the universe? Small question.
Okay. That's a tall order, but I would like to emphasize that the current theory about our universe, by which I mean that essential body of space and time that contains our everything. We see galaxies to very great distances. We see back in time to just shortly after the creation event. And all of this is what we call our universe with a capital U. And the problem today is that we don't have any theory for the outer edge of the universe. Today, we have a theory that seems not to be working very well called the cold dark matter theory. And some people put a lambda in the front and say, well, it's an ever expanding cold dark matter dominated universe. But if you ask that same theorist, and what's at the outer edge of the universe, how does it connect to other possible universes or not? And the answer is, well, we don't know. It just seems like it must peter out somehow. That is to say, it's expanding ever faster, but into what we really can't say. And we don't see any way of limiting the outer part of it. But that's a failed theory of what a black hole is. And in my view, the universe does have an outer edge, because the picture of what a black hole is, that is the accepted belief, what's called the Schwarzschild black hole, has a infinity in it. And mathematician Norbert Hilbert said a long time ago, but we need the concept of infinity for to close our calculus and mathematical systems, but infinity does not relate to any property that we can ever observe in our universe. And so we should be careful about positing that there is an infinite density matter surface associated with the black hole, as is in the accepted Schwarzschild model. Fortunately, I ganged up with some really top-notch physicists and astrophysicists about 15 years ago and solved this problem. It turns out that when you examine carefully the formation of a black hole object, and now remember, we're talking about an object like a gas ball that's common of the dark matter in our universe, and it closes faster and faster, and the more it pulls in on itself and shrinks, the higher its density goes, and that means it starts shrinking even faster. So you get a faster implosion, and it's presumed that it just goes on forever, and there's no limit to the density that this could attain. Now, quantum mechanics has a different story to tell. It says that no, you cannot exceed the density of matter with atomic matter present, because there comes a time when there's a pressure that builds up, a kind of a pressure that builds up due to the quantum effects of trying to go to higher and higher density, and quantum effects limit the amount of collapsing that the gas ball can do, and you get a finite sized object. Now, we published a lot of data that showed that this was, in fact, apparently true, and that objects should generate a very strong magnetic field. But we were very unpopular with this idea, because the theory was that, in a little word phrase of the time, black holes have no hair. And that was a way of tossing off the possibility that they have magnetic fields. And for many years, that was taught as religion, basically, that black holes have no magnetic fields. Well, we predicted that the universe made objects that have magnetic fields, and strong magnetic fields, maybe 100 Gauss, that is maybe thousands of times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. Anyway, this was all upended then when I think 5 years ago, the Bonn Radio Observatory, studying the galaxy, or the black hole at the center of our galaxy, also technically called Sagittarius A star, it exhibited properties of a black hole with hair. That is to say, it was a collapsed, condensed body of finite density, but it allowed magnetic fields to penetrate the surface of the object and escape to form a dark magnetic field around the object. So the door was now open to a new idea about what black holes are. They are quantum limited objects that collapse as far as they can. The brakes are put on by quantum effects. Now it occurred to me that this was a perfect way to understand the outer boundary of our universe, except it was inside out. So remember that in talking about a black hole, we're talking about an object which has collapsed faster and faster and faster, except then it had to stop in our theory. So it left you with an object that had some kind of a Bose-Einstein condensate or something on a fabulously dense interior. And then it had physical matter, that is the stuff, hydrogen atoms and helium and boron and all the other stuff we see around us on the outside of the black hole object. Technically, it is no longer than a black hole, because black hole means the Schwarzschild black hole with an infinite density. And we substitute instead the word MECO, MECO, meaning meaning magnetic eternally collapsing object. And so we think the outer boundary of our universe is this inside out MECO object, where the outside is a pure quantum space, not the inside like in the black hole case. And the outside is our physical universe on its inside. So outside is no physical matter. Inside is lots and lots of physical matter that we call our universe. In other words, we have found that there should be an outer bound to our universe, and that it would be porous to magnetic effects, which is extremely important.
I'm glad I asked you that question right off the bat. I want to bring in Nick, if you don't mind, because I want to continue in that conversation.
Okay.
Nick, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this? Have you come across in your own research what Rudy is explaining?
Well, I'm fascinated by it. And of course, it is extremely germane to the whole matter of consciousness and how we derive our own consciousness, in my opinion. But if I may, because I'm very conscious that we don't have an enormous amount of time to discuss these hugely weighty and important subjects. And I would like to cut actually straight to the chase, because this is where, and apologies, Rudy, but the former journalist in me just starts bubbling up with questions of all kinds to you. In my research, particularly when I was researching for the Bix essay that I did for Mr. Bigelow's Consciousness Institute competition, I read widely. I read about Edgar Mitchell's quantum hologram theory and various other people's. I read particularly also Donald Hoffman's theory about the interface theory of perception, and there were some overlaps there which I found interesting, and I find them also very interesting in the way they overlap with your own work, Rudy. So I've got a question for you, which is that my very data-driven approach, I'm not a scientist, but I look at data, and my data-driven approach told me, quite sort of independently really of the reading that I was doing, that the universe is an information-based computational system. And I think that gels pretty uniformly with some of your own ideas, but I'd really love you to explain, if you could, how you see the universe as an information-based computer, a self-learning AI, and what its purpose would be, if you like. Can I throw that question at you?
Mm-hmm. In the first place, I believe that we are seeing the purpose of the universe being played out. And I feel driven to that in many ways. But what I believe is that the universe was created for the purpose of life to emerge and thrive. I first heard this idea expressed by Walter Gamble, who made a movie to support this assertion. And I thought that was convincing, and I found it made so much sense to me that I believe I started to derive a cosmology and theology about this, and I think that that's much deeper than we would go in this conversation. But I believe that the purpose of the universe, whether you imagine it was some greater consciousness, or maybe the vacuum zero point energy field, that caused it to create universes with this purpose, that underneath or within the universes there would develop life which can appreciate its creator.
Can I throw that back again? That's very interesting. Thank you. Which is the creator creates its universe for a purpose. And as you say, that purpose is the creation of life. But is there a feedback loop element to it insofar as what its creations are able to do is allow it to understand what it has created through the experiences of the things it has created. So my experiences, your experiences are feedback mechanisms back into the system that allows it to understand itself and computationally to grow from that. Would that be a very is that way off the mark?
It's one of the most brilliant things I've heard, and I believe it's absolutely true. And you see, the universe becomes, or the universe of universes becomes, a giant feedback mechanism if life emerges to appreciate its creator. So, yes, it is a giant feedback loop in which the creator of the universe of universes is exalted and magnified.
And thank you, Rudy. That's great. So that's further helped my understanding. Luciano, apologies for hijacking this, but this is just
No,
so
this is
important.
yours.
I love this part of the discussion. But is it also, Rudy, that second point that through the well, in our case, the very material bases of our existence as humans or animals or rocks or cars or whatever it is in our universe, on our planet, through those creations, the creator can also understand what it has created, because I am undergoing, as a human being, a very human experience of love, hate, pain, joy, suffering, all of these emotions. And those are such precious things, it strikes me as, but they're also very precious data points that feed back into the system that I hope you might say allow the creator to understand what it has created and for the system to grow, because those creations have their own interactions, which produce more data, which feeds back into the system and again expands the system, allowing it to grow. Is that a really way off the mark again? Sort of.
No, it's right on the mark. It is the mark. It is a mark. It is that the universe feeds back on its creator and magnifies and glorifies it.
Well, that is.
We're done.
So glad that my own, kind of stumbling meanderings and crunching through the data have allowed me to reach the same conclusions as some of the most eminent scientists on the planet, yourself included, because it just strikes me as suddenly the universe lights up for me at that moment as it is no longer a cold place. It's this warm, interactive place that is described so brilliantly by your former colleague Edgar Mitchell, whose work I loved, by the way. And it suddenly brings this cold-looking place alive in the way that it interacts with us. And I'd love to hear a few more thoughts from you on that. My next question would be, to you would be, is the universe as a computational model the same or different, or does it have any similarities to the universe as a simulation? So, in other words, what we are going through is a kind of simulated model of the creator. Are those two different things, or is there any overlap there?
Well, I'm very strongly in favor of the view that the universe is not just a simulation and that it does have a firm reality. And in this, I quote our highly respected predecessor, Edgar Mitchell. He addressed this question in a simple phrase. He says, "What I know is that if I bang my head on the table, it hurts." End of discussion.
Correct. But within the frameworks, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Within the framework of a simulated model, it would hurt because that is the computational boundary, if you like, the framework of the system that you've put in place, which will say you live in a material universe, Nick, Rudy, and Luciano, and if you are stupid enough to bang your head against the desk, it is going to hurt because that's the framework.
I don't think I can make any sensible answer to that, because you're in the land of infinite possibilities, and we're not getting down to anything that has in any way a possibility to make a prediction. So it has all the weakness of string theory. That is to say, it cannot limit anything. And I tell the graduate students, they're not hiring string theorists on Wall Street.
Very good. Well, Luciano, I'm going to hand your own podcast back to you in a second.
No, not at all.
I'm so enjoying this conversation.
Go for it.
But could we go to the conscious experience of me, the human being now? And Rudy, I wanted to ask you if you could to explain in ways that I'm going to understand how I, as Nick, derive my conscious experience from this universe that you've just described.
Yes. I think you know that I address this question by likening the operation of consciousness and the brain to a computer, a digital computer such as I'm talking at right now. Now, the essential part of a computer is its clock. And I want to tell you that I'm probably the only person in the room who has actually built a computer. That is to say, out of resistors, transistors, condensers, and capacitors. So a stack of electronics pieces, and you had a computer that operated an instrument mounted to a telescope on Mount Palomar in 1977. So I know something about what's in that box. And the essential ingredient is a clock. And I think you know that my idea of how a computer works is that the clock in the computer is telling the computer next step, next step, next step, next step, next step. At every beat, it's being told, now do another calculation, now do another one, and another one, and another one, and we'll line up the calculations before they get to you. And so all you've got to do is just follow down the two parallel rows of numbers which operate on each other within the computer, and the computer produces an output like the sum of the numbers or the product of the numbers, and that is your computer, soul and heart. That is the clock. Now, the human being has such a device. It's called the heart. It puts out a pulse of 1 second beats. It is easy for a logical structure with operating in the brain to break that down into a factor of 2 or 2 to the second power 4 or 8 or 16. And it's almost certainly no accident that the beta frequency of human consciousness is 16 hertz. That happens to be 2 to the 4th power. So inside of the brain, there is this little network of neurons that, first one fills up, and then the next one fills up, and the next one. And after 16 of these, it flashes something. Can you see that that would be easy to do in a structuring of nerves? And so the subharmonics, but also the positive harmonics, 2 hertz, I'm sorry, 2 cycles per second, 4 cycles per second, 8 cycles per second, 16 cycles per second. That's all easy to arrange in a comparable little network of molecules operating within the brain. And so we have this device in our bodies that is also in every electronic computer. It's the clock. And the computer is chugging away at about a billion calculations per second. That's a gigahertz. And it's just going compute, 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 compute. And then, well, what do you compute? And that's where the brain gets interesting insofar as it's a bicameral or two-chamber or two-sided affair. And so in one side, which is known to be monitoring the function and condition of the body and of the outside world and its environment through vision and sound recognition, that's one side of your being. And the other side is that kind of soul connection, that part that connects with your outer and most intimate being, and allows you to have opinions about things. I'm afraid to meet people. I'm afraid when it gets dark out. To have those experiences, and then have information pouring in about it's dark out, or that there's a lion chasing me. All of that's important information, and the brain has to put that together and form a response, which is that output of the clock. That is to say, there's the mechanism that compares the two sides of the brain, and then that drives the motor neuron system and tells the neuron system, run like hell, or just close your eyes, or whatever it's going to say. But it allows you to take in the two inputs, compare reality, left brain, with soul or eternal being, right brain, and make a decision, motor neuron system. That's the basic function and operation of the computer and of the human brain and nervous system.
So is the right hemisphere soul part the part that continues, that's on a permanent continuum?
That's right. And that's you have your own experience of, and your experience with a shared experience of your, I guess, mother-in-law's death, your wife's mother's death. You shared that, and you were forming judgments about that all the time, that this was occurring in real time. And you had opinions about that. What am I doing? This is not me. I'm hearing a voice coming from beyond somehow. I'm learning things that are coming from beyond somehow. Why is this happening to me? And your left lobe was saying, just shut up and listen.
It was interesting because it was actually it was my wife's shared death experience. She was holding her mum's hand when this happened. So for her, that experience was timeless and infinite. You know, for me, standing next to her a few feet away, time ticked by perhaps a second or two. And before she came out of that experience. But for her, it was like she'd been in it forever. It was just like a typical description of a near-death experience. What I wanted to ask was whether, is there any sort of scientific analog for what I will crudely say or try and describe as this is a belief, it's not driven by the data, that if our consciousness, that right hemisphere soul part of us, is a part of the complete consciousness of the universal model, do we as individuals or individuated consciousnesses, as souls, do we make a pact with the system to come back and experience the system through reincarnation, whether in human form or some other form, to experience more of the creator's creation and to feed more data back into the loop in the way that we were describing earlier? Does any of that have any analog in the science that you look at, Rudy?
It's hard to talk about it as having an analog, but I would like to tell you what is, in a sense, a proof. It's more like a proof of what I'm saying is true. And that is that the universe exhibits its purpose all the time, as evidenced by the medical community. You'll find, talking to doctors, that they are astonished, especially the research scientists, they're astonished by the ability of the human body or any body, any living thing, to respond appropriately to a danger or to a mishap or to a failure. In other words, the medical community is so often confronted by the fact that if they have a cell under microscopic inspection and maybe a piece is cut off of it deliberately, then what is noticed is that that living cell always seems to take the path toward the most direct path that could be imagined toward healing itself. Now, how does that happen if it was not sort of breathed into the universe at the time the universe was formed, so that all future formation of the universe embodies that tendency? And so all of the life functions are reinforced and go in the direction of self-healing throughout the history of the universe. Everything in the universe is geared to this purpose, for life to form and thrive. So word that was made in the beginning makes you wonder about theology. It makes you wonder, wasn't the universe somehow built this way, and by what intelligence? And so we're always back to the same question: what is the vacuum zero-point energy? What is the nature of the creator? Is there some embodiment of our being that is the creator? And how do we show that on paper? And how do we draw a picture of this? How do we understand this? We're always back at the same question of origin. But in my view, the origin does come with the purpose of the universe, which is, once again, do you want to say it? For life to arise and thrive.
Yes. And to learn and grow.
Yes. Right?
Yeah.
And expand itself. And so
yes.
You asked me directly the question of, well, what about successive reincarnations? And what could that be except the soul growing and learning and expanding?
Fantastic.
Well,
fascinating.
Can I just add something? Maybe that is the purpose of the universe, to learn and grow, as Nick just said. But maybe the purpose of our little cog in the machine, our little bubble within the universe of universes, is to forget and re-forget and re-forget. And then we have conversations like this over and over and over. Like there is a forgetfulness in our consciousness that we can't, it seems like we can't escape. And so if I use escape, are we entrapped?
So we're not trapped at all. And in fact, you seem to be making the assumption that the universe forgets when you talk about how we forget. Well, separate we as living sentient beings from the rest of the universe, because the universe forgets nothing. Everything that has happened in the history of the universe is codified and stored in the surfaces of black holes. So you already have heard so many times that the black hole is in a state of continuous contraction, and the most recent sampling it does of the quantum hologram is a sampling of the most recent time of the universe. But that gradually gets absorbed and dragged into near the center of the black hole, and more stuff gets layered on top of it, more material. It's always raining down on the black hole, and the black hole is itself expanding. And that is also all projected in the quantum hologram. All information of everything in the universe is stored there, much of it at very low amplitude, but nonetheless present. And it all is stored in successive onion skin-like layers. Think of an onion and how it's layered, and every layer of the black hole is a snapshot of the universe in one instant.
You mentioned in one of our earlier episodes.
That's nothing.
Well, yeah, you named it. I mean, this is the first time I heard it. You said the black hole is nature's hard drive. So we were talking earlier
Yes,
about
very
computing.
good.
Well, those are your words, so thank you. I'll take the credit, but it's not mine. But let me tie it to something that Nick asked of you, because you mentioned soul connection when Nick introduced the discussion of emotions and feelings. And it reminded me of the conversation that you where we had, and you explained how the black hole is nature's hard drive. And then you said soul connection, and then Nick followed up with the question about, well, is the right hemisphere? Sorry, Nick. Now I've forgotten because I wrote right hemisphere, and then I forgot to write the following words. But you mentioned the right hemisphere as being a point of reference. Let me just gloss it over a little bit.
Okay.
That reminded me, and so this, I guess the question is embedded in this. That reminded me of a conversation that we had here on the podcast with a neuroscientist, a neuroanatomist, a Jill Bolt Taylor. I'm not sure if either of you know her story, but okay, quick story. One of the best TED Talks I've ever seen in my life. Actually, the second best. The first is he's deceased, but we'll talk about that later. She experienced a stroke. Let me back up. She became a neuroanatomist because she wanted to understand the workings of the brain, because she grew up with a brother who was schizophrenic. So this is the reason why she went into this field. Her story began when she had a stroke, and she lived her life in two for that moment, that episode. Her left brain was trying to call for help and was trying to figure out how to dial numbers, when the right side of her brain, she describes it this way, the right side of her brain was floating like a giant whale in the sea of silent euphoria. And she didn't want to escape that. And it took 9 years of quote unquote rehabilitation to come back to herself. But she was always herself in those 9 years, except the medical community and scientists, for the most part, didn't believe that she was not unwell. Is that she discovered something about herself in that sea of silent euphoria that changed her forever. And talking about the right side of the brain and soul connection and nature's hard drive, the black hole being nature's hard drive. Maybe I'm just saying too much here, but is this all the similar string here of experiences? Is that, do we, in order to see what the universe really has in store for us, does the left side of our brain need to tamper down? Does it need to shut down? Does it need not to exist? Uh, I know that's a crude question, but would that be the case? I want to live in
Well,
a
I believe,
silent euphoria. Sorry, go ahead.
well, I think you do. And I think that I do. And I think that we all do. I think we all have an equilibrium in our minds between the left brain is our experience of the world and ourselves and our friends, and the right brain is our opinions about that. Our referencing to an eternal body allows us to say, well, I just don't think that's right. Or I think I'm better than that. That is, I have a purpose for existing, and it would not include that such a stupid idea. So I think that we are examples of a beautiful equilibrium between left and right brain, each serving their function, but not separate, yes, equal. That is to say, the two are feeding back on each other in a pleasant, agreeable equilibrium. I can choose to go to a music concert and derive pleasure from that, or I can knuckle down and write some more equations. So I feel as though my life is a beautiful equilibrium of the two brain halves serving kind of fundamentally different purposes, but happily mated together.
I had a question, if I may. Again, I'm sorry, it's jumping on a bit, but again, I'm conscious of the time, and of course, I've got this wonderful opportunity, Rudy, to pick your brain here. But I was taken in your paper with your discussion about helical waves as the fundamental shape of consciousness energy, if I've got that right.
Yes.
I've recently been reading. I spend a great deal of time reading about, so-called heretical science, and one of those heresies has been about torsion fields and torsion waves. And Dr.
There it
Claude
is.
Swanson, I've read his work with great interest about the influence of torsion waves and torsion fields, which I'll probably allow you to explain, Rudy, but I gather these are fields or waves that carry information rather than energy at speeds faster than light. Are those the same or similar to your discussion about helical waves and their influence on consciousness?
Absolutely. And I want to say something that I have never seen or read, which I think is very important to this discussion. The nature of our quantum universe is such that every particle in the universe has a disturbance of the quantum field, and it leaves its mark as some waveform in that field. And you never hear anybody talk about it, but in fact, it is a spherical form. So all matter expresses itself in the quantum field as a spherical basic structure. So the Earth, for example, is a giant ball of quantum field, which is strongest at the surface of the Earth and then decays slowly as you get farther away. And that's all expressed in the quantum hologram anyway. But there it is. That's the structuring of matter in the universe. Now, it's a property of spherical waves that they can interact, because if you can imagine, my hand here is a spherical wave that describes some matter that's in the middle of my fist. A spherical wave coming along from my fist goes around it and interacts as it goes around, a couple loops around it, maybe many loops around it. But anyway, it is in interaction. So I'm saying my consciousness expressed in these Wilhelm Reich waves, or these helical waves, and the quantum description of the matter, which is now a spherical wave, those two can interact, even if it's just for a brief moment. Now, this produces what's called entanglement. You see, that's one of the key operators in the universe that hooks us all together instantaneously. And so there is this mode of interaction between consciousness waves and matter waves. And that is very fundamental to so many of the experiences people experience as mental activity, even though it is actually physical operations at work. The car crash was going to occur because there was so much linear momentum in the approaching vehicles. You know, because of that story, there's information that can be related in the helical waves, and that can interact with the brain, even though it's nowhere in the vicinity of this.
So could I ask you then whether if helical waves and torsion fields are sort of broadly analogous, can you explain how they would give rise to anomalous phenomena like telepathy or remote viewing or psychokinesis, for example?
Well, it's easier for me to do this by starting out with a phenomenon that's a little bit physical in the first place. So I like to talk about the plasmas, plasmoids, and orbs that some people see.
They were going to be my next question, by the way. So I'm really pleased
you
you're
wanted to
talking
get here anyway.
Yes.
So we've laid the groundwork in the last 5 minutes by talking about how there is a connection between physical matter and the mind through these helical waves. Now, such waves can persist for a very long time and go circumnavigate the universe for all that matter, for all we know. And I don't know that there is any damping factor that's introduced for them. There's maybe a dilution factor, but I don't know of any damping factor except a phase of the opposite um, direction of rotation. And if those two collide, then you can have a damping of the consciousness wave. Anyway, many people have noticed that there are these orb things that somehow intrude in their lives. They see them, especially if they are in sacred places. If you're in a Native American burial ground, say, or if you're in a beautiful, serene mountaintop setting, you can have a feeling for this place, which might be a shared feeling with many others who have been here, and that has somehow embedded itself into the rocks of the place. You see, we now have a mechanism for unifying physical matter and mental operation. Now, I wanted to bring this up to orbs. There seem to be two kinds of orbs, and one has the physical shape of a coil spring on an automobile. You know, that's the one that just winds around, maybe 10 winds, and then you have a spring that's this big, and when you turn it up sideways, then it goes up and down and up and down and absorbs all the bumps in the road. So that's what we'll call a coil-shaped wave. But there is another more interesting form of wave, and that is the expanding one, the cone-shaped one. The envelope of its waving is a cone. And so as it proceeds outward from the brain as a consciousness wave, then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, now you see we have a waveform that's involved in consciousness that hooks into the overall structuring of material throughout the universe, because all of that material is expressed in the quantum field as spherical waves, and these helical waves can hook onto that and be amplified or boosted or canceled or whatever it's going to do. But anyway, that can form giant wave structures throughout the universe. And we see these things. And if you talk to people who are very well versed with the works of Wilhelm Reich, he called these kinds of waves Kreiswellen, or circle waves. And he identified these as somehow the carriers of consciousness, and was actually able to see them. Now, that means that he's using a kind of vision that most people don't have. And he had this expanded vision, which people who have seen a flying saucer up close and personal, also have. And this gets a little bit complicated mathematically now, because light is a emanation from an oscillating device of some kind, an electron in an antenna, being back and forth, shoots out a ray, and its energy is then diminished slightly, and the ray contains that energy and can now cross the universe if it's not impeded in some way. Now, in addition to that, if you look and examine Maxwell's equations that describe the radiation of light from an oscillating electron, you will find that there are more solutions to those equations for structuring of the electromagnetic field in a way that doesn't propagate, like the way light wave goes away from its place of origin and crosses the universe. But these kinds of solutions to the equations are called quadrupole solutions, and they're kind of enveloped around the oscillating electron. I'm afraid the people haven't seen my oscillating electron, just shaking up and down in a transmitter tower, and that's creating the radio signal that you pick up in your car radio or on your home stereo system. Anyway, these waves that are alternate solutions are called quadrupole radiation, and they are part of the complicated radiation process, which is amplified by the spacecraft. And so when the human being looks at the light emanating from the spacecraft, it is trying to make sense of this and realizes and automatically develops new neural pathways in its brain structuring. It has expanded capabilities to sense these four-dimensional, these higher dimensional waves, which don't flow away, and they actually fall off intensity very quickly, faster than light does. In other words, they're strong near the source, and once you get very far from the source, they're very, very weak. Mathematically, they don't go off as the second power of distance the way light does, but as the fourth power of distance. So when a light wave is seen here, and you look over here, then it's a factor of 4 less. But this other kind of wave I talk about is a factor of 16 less. That's the fourth power of 2, or of a half. Anyway, this other form of radiation then has changed the structuring of your brain. Now that's profound.
Which introduces a very profound line of thought, certainly for me, which is Jacques Vallée says that there are two aspects to UAP phenomena, UFO phenomenon. There is a physical side to them, and then there is a non-physical side to them. And their appearance before us, therefore by extrapolation, at least by me, is that they may have a dual purpose or multiple purposes. I mean, one of them may be for transportation and travel purposes for their denizens, whoever they are, but the other would be as an informational relay system to us. And insofar as you say, Rudy, if our if we ourselves, our perception mechanisms are changed or altered by seeing these things, then they appear or might appear to have a role other than simply being transportation devices, that they are in some way geared to changing our consciousness in a way I certainly don't understand. But would that resonate at all as a model for you?
Absolutely. That's, in fact, what I'm trying to shout. I'm trying to shout that once the brain, from the light of a UFO or UAP device, um, having a strong component of this, then the brain rewiring is part of your daily experience. And many other people are radiating this kind of quadrupole radiation that's intensified most when you're in close contact. And therefore, you have tremendous intuition capabilities. You become animal whisperers, bird whisperers, horse whisperers, cat whisperers. You have a close relationship with people that you don't really know that well, but have a close, how shall I say, sympathy with that person, because your mind exchanges information very easily, and that other person's mind is very like yours, and so you are somehow tied together through this effect of consciousness and through these waveforms that you've absorbed as most easily and most directly by vision and by seeing a spacecraft that's loaded with them, or that just spreads them like crazy.
Well, that's amazing. And Luciano, I'm sorry. I know we said we were going to kind of round off after about an hour, but do we have 5 more minutes? Because I've got a really
100%.
kind of this is kind of zeroing in for me to a kind of key question for Rudy.
Be you.
Which is this, that so if then, as you've just said, Rudy, UFOs have this kind of at least a dual purpose, and one of them is as a sort of perception changing mechanism that, in a sense, is rebooting our consciousness, or it's booting it up to some new level of it's a consciousness shift in a sense.
Yeah, you're right.
And if it's doing that, and of course the frequency of sightings is, to me, quite sort of counterintuitive in terms of just looking on them as transportation systems. Why the hell do you need to see so many UFOs in the sky or elsewhere if they are simply transportation systems? It doesn't, to my mind, make sense. If, however, they have a role as a consciousness shifting mechanism as well, then that makes a little more sense, which brings me to my question, which is, Jacques Vallée talks about a control system theory, a control mechanism inherent within the UFO phenomenon. And there is there's a dual side to it, but there's a dark side to that as well, which is that the purpose of that control system may not be to our liking ultimately, but it's still a control system. So my question gets back to what we were talking about maybe half an hour or 40 minutes ago, about the role of a computational model to the universe devised by a creator in a system where you could get a control mechanism by a non-human intelligence. Who wins? Does the non-human intelligence trump the creator's own control of the system, or would the creator and his or her or its model of the universe at all times win in a in the control of its creation? Can its creation, in other words, be hacked momentarily by a non-human intelligence to produce Jacques Vallée's control system theory?
My response is that once again, this comes back to the purpose of the universe in the first place. So many questions are answered by acknowledging the purpose of the universe. It isn't possible to change this purpose of the universe. It is too deeply embedded in all the minute processes. I gave the example of self-repair of cells in a body. And you can't deny all of that in one fell swoop. There's no emperor that can say, I forbid empathy. That just can't happen. The universe is built to embody empathy and feeling through the quantum field. So the universe's purpose comes into play ultimately, and what your hypothetical example wouldn't happen or wouldn't get very far.
Great. Well, that's
It's
good.
fighting against the flow. It's fighting against the current.
Well, and on a last sort of sidebar to that, Thomas Campbell's theory of everything,
Yes.
which I like, because at its center is this idea that love is the propelling mechanism, if you like, of the forward growth of the universe, that expansiveness of the universe, and that it has a counter entropy role in it. Are you familiar with his theory, and are there bits of it that chime with you, or does it all chime with you?
I've read enough of it that I'm not interested, because the part that I've read was the one that says, well, there is no reality, no physical matter, that it's all a simulation. And I just think that makes no sense whatsoever. So I stopped reading, but I don't, I admit that if he gets into discussion of the character of love and the emotional aspects of the universe, well, that's a different matter. And I would have to explore that, but I don't owe Tom Campbell anything. So I haven't set aside my mathematical work yet.
But perhaps just to leave then on that high note, which is when my wife had her shared death experience, she said that the place, if you want to call it that, where she went to was immersed, soaked through with love and connection. I mean, and that is common to near-death experiences and, and other experiences.
Yes.
So it bespeaks to me something of the substrate of the universe, this information-based hologram, that what we feel as human beings as love is somehow soaked or embedded into the substrate of all there is. Would you say that was true, or seem?
Yes, 100%.
Great.
It's great.
We've got that going for us then.
Yeah, you're right. You could say that the universe was born with love. It was a place where love should arise and propagate. There is a machinery for its propagation. And we are now mastering how to concentrate that purpose into this device called the UAP or the UFO, whatever you like. and it is masterfully able to amplify um, the beings who occupy it and to amplify their love for the creation and for other individuals. So maybe there is something in Tom Campbell's writings that I would like.
Well, I have 1,000,001 other questions from that, Rudy. We're going to, Luciano, if I may crave this indulgence, we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point.
100%.
But I've so enjoyed the conversation, and I'm going to hand back to you, my host.
Nick, you're hired. So I also want to leave on a high note. I guess these are my closing remarks. And I thank you both very much for this. I had a lot of fun sitting back. I know I interjected a couple of times, but it didn't matter. I had a lot of fun. So, and these notes that I take, most of them are just for me. But I did take some notes here in the last 5 minutes or so. I want to stay on this high note because I think what you guys just discussed, the both of you just discussed the last 5 minutes, makes so much sense to our purpose here at the podcast and what we're trying to figure out. So we always try to, we stick to our mission of asking the why not and the what if. And so we want to talk to people who are already doing that, regardless of vocation and where they spend their time. Nick, you brought up Tom Campbell's book and empathy, and then and Rudy, you mentioned love, and then the both of you did the same. And Nick, when you mentioned again your wife's experience about being not feeling love and connection, I thought maybe connection is where this all begins, because when we say empathy, these are my thoughts. When we say empathy, empathy is really the bind, I think. And we had Joe McMoneagle here on the podcast, and he described how he believes we're all just shards of one. And he, of course, with 5 episodes of examples of his own real life. But I'll end it with this because I'm really believing this more and more. When the discussion came to the lights from these craft that are supposedly changing brainwaves and changing structure and changing how, to Nick's words, changing our consciousness, I was thinking, well, maybe they're not changing it. Maybe they're adding back. And when Rudy says, or when Rudy said, you become more, being exposed to this, you become more intuitive. You become a horse whisperer, as example, an artist of sorts, as an example, and more empathetic. I just thought I mean, words are just words, but when Rudy says you become, I'm wondering if you become again that. If we all believe that we're shards and that we are part of something else and we're all connected, maybe these lights, whatever they are, these plasmoids, whatever it is that we're seeing, maybe they're meant there to be a reminder to us that we are, in fact, that we forgot, connected. That's all I got.
So, maybe so.
That's very good.
Thank you again to you both.
I can live with that. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Can you? I still want silent euphoria.
Nick, it's been fun talking to you and exchanging ideas. I know that your work is very carefully studied and very thoroughly researched. And so I want to honor your commitment to coming to these very fundamental issues, which I have approached from the opposite end of what does the physical universe have to say about all of this, and how do we put our personal experiences in the context of the operations of the universe on the global scale, beyond global, the universal scale. So thank you for your questions, and we're actually in agreement about practically everything. And I've just changed the vocabulary a little bit here and there.
And I've
Wonderful.
loved hearing you do it. I've so enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Rudy, and thank you, Luciano, for this invitation. It's been for me, it's been a complete joy. Thank you so much.
And my thanks to you, Luciano, for putting this together. I think you expressed some beautiful intuition in anticipating that this would be a very nice time for the two of us, and it was indeed. Thank you, Luciano.
I'm rarely right. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Until the next.
Until the next.
Until.